The wind howled across the open plains as the last traces of daylight faded behind the mountains. The small farmhouse stood alone, surrounded by miles of frozen pasture and barbed wire fences that rattled in the cold. Inside, a fire crackled weakly in the stone fireplace, struggling to warm the corners of the old house. Mary Callahan sat near the hearth, mending a torn quilt, her fingers numb despite the flames. She had been alone for months now, ever since her husband, Daniel, had gone west in search of work and never returned. That night, as she prepared to close up and bolt the door, she heard the faint sound of hooves approaching. At first, she thought it might just be her imagination. The wind often played tricks on her, but then came the soft, uneven rhythm again. Hooves, followed by the creak of leather and the faint jingle of spurs. She rose quickly, heart thudding. Visitors were rare out here, especially after dark. She took her lantern and peered through the frost-covered window. A man was riding slowly up the path, leading a small horse beside him. A boy sat slumped in the saddle of that second horse, wrapped in a thin blanket. The man's hat was pulled low, his shoulders hunched against the wind. Mary hesitated, her hand on the latch. It wasn't wise to open your door to strangers, not anymore. But then she saw the boy small, shivering, his face pale and tired, and something in her heart softened. When the knock came, it was gentle. "Ma'am," said a low voice from the other side. "I'm sorry to trouble you this late. My boy's sick, and we've been riding since dawn. We just need a place to stay the night. I can pay if need be." Mary opened the door slowly, the lantern light spilling across the porch. The man was tall, his coat worn and dusty, his beard streaked with gray. The boy looked no older than 10, his cheeks hollow and eyes heavy with exhaustion. "You don't need to pay," she said quietly. "Come in before you both freeze." The man tipped his hat, relief washing over his face. "Thank you kindly, ma'am. You're a blessing." They entered, and Mary shut the door against the wind. She led them to the fire, where the boy sank gratefully onto a rug. She fetched blankets, hot water, and what little food she had left, a pot of beans and some cornbread. The man watched her with quiet gratitude as his son ate slowly, warming his hands by the fire. "My name's Thomas," he said after a while. "This here's my boy, Luke." "Mary Callahan," she replied. "You're a long way from town, Mr. Thomas." He nodded. "We were headed for Denver, but my horse went lame near the ridge. Thought we could find a place to rest a spell." She studied him as he spoke. His voice was steady but tired, his clothes rough and patched. Something about him seemed heavy, like he was carrying more than just the weight of the journey. But she asked no questions. She knew what it was like to carry burdens you didn't want to share. As the night deepened, Luke drifted off to sleep by the fire. Thomas helped her bring in more wood, his movements careful, respectful. When she thanked him, he just smiled faintly. "You remind me of my wife," he said quietly. "Always helping folks that needed it." "She passed?" Mary asked gently. He nodded once. 3 winters ago. Been just me and Luke since." The silence between them stretched, not awkward but filled with unspoken understanding. Outside, the wind howled against the windows, and Mary found herself strangely comforted by the presence of these 2 strangers. Later, as she spread quilts for them to sleep on, Thomas hesitated. "Ma'am," he said softly, "you sure you're all right with us staying? I know it ain't proper." "It's a cold night," she said simply. "And I don't turn away folks in need." He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. "You've got a kind heart. The world doesn't have many like you anymore. They slept under the same roof that night, the boy near the fire, Thomas stretched out on the floor, and Mary lying awake in her small bedroom, listening to the wind and wondering about the strangers who had found her door. When morning came, the world outside was white with snow. Thomas was already up, feeding the horses and brushing the frost from their manes. Luke, looking stronger, helped her carry water from the well. The boy smiled shyly when she thanked him, and it warmed her heart. Over breakfast, Thomas mentioned they'd be leaving by noon. "Can't stay too long," he said. "Got to make it over the ridge before the next storm." Mary felt a pang of disappointment. She didn't know why. Perhaps it was the company, the sound of another voice in the house, the laughter of a child. Her loneliness had been a constant ache for months, and now, for a brief moment, it had faded. Before they left, Thomas insisted on paying her. He placed a few crumpled bills on the table. "For your kindness," he said. She shook her head. "I told you, you don't owe me a thing." But he left the money anyway, and when he took her hand to say goodbye, she noticed the faint tremor in his fingers. "Take care of yourself, Mrs. Callahan," he said softly. "You're a good woman." She watched them ride off into the white distance until they disappeared behind the trees. Then she turned back inside, the house suddenly feeling colder and emptier than before. It was 2 days later when the sheriff came. Mary was in the barn, tending to the chickens, when she heard horses approaching again. 3 men this time, 2 deputies and Sheriff Hobbs, a broad man with a gray mustache and a weary face. "Mornin', Mary," he greeted, tipping his hat. "Sorry to bother you, but I need to ask if you've seen anyone pass through recently." "A man and a boy." Her heart quickened. "Yes," she said slowly. "A cowboy and his son. They stayed one night when the snow hit." "Why?" The sheriff exchanged a glance with his deputy. "That'd be Thomas Gaines, most likely. Wanted man. There's a bounty on him out of Wyoming." Mary froze. "A bounty? Bank robbery. 4 months ago," the sheriff said grimly. 2 men dead. Been running with his boy ever since. Folks say he's dangerous." Mary's stomach turned. She thought of the quiet man who had thanked her, the gentle way he'd spoken to his son, the tremor in his hands. "He didn't seem dangerous," she murmured. "He was kind." The sheriff sighed. "Maybe. But kind or not, he's done bad things. If you see him again, you come straight to me, you hear?" She nodded, her throat too tight to speak. When they left, she sat on the porch steps, staring out at the empty horizon. She couldn't believe it, the man who had sat by her fire, who had smiled so softly when his boy laughed, a killer. A thief. Days turned into weeks, and the snow melted slowly from the hills. Life went on, but Mary couldn't shake the memory of Thomas and Luke. Sometimes she thought she heard the echo of hoofbeats at night, and her heart would leap, but it was always just the wind. Then, one evening near spring, she found something strange by the fence. A small, leather pouch tied shut with a strip of twine. Inside were a few gold coins and a folded note. The handwriting was rough, hurried. "Mrs. Callahan, you saved us that night. I don't expect forgiveness for what I've done, but I wanted you to have this. It's not stolen, it's all I have that's honest. Me and Luke are heading north. Maybe someday we'll make things right. You take care of yourself. T. Gaines." Mary read the note over and over, her eyes stinging with tears. She didn't know if he'd ever be caught, or if he'd find redemption. But in her heart, She believed there was still goodness in him, the same goodness she had seen in the quiet way he tucked the blanket around his son. That night, she placed the note in her Bible and lit a candle in the window. A light, small but steady, for two souls wandering the vast, cold plains, a reminder that kindness, once given, can sometimes reach farther than any law or judgment. And though she never saw them again, every time the wind carried the faint sound of hooves, Mary Callahan would pause by the fire, her heart full of both sorrow and hope, whispering a prayer for the poor cowboy and his son who had changed her life in just one night.